of the person's genes, we could recreate a person physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I would challenge that. An implanted chip would be like an aircraft's black box and would enhance communications beyond current concepts, he said. For example, police would be able to use it to relive an attack, rape, or murder from the victim's viewpoint to help catch the criminal. Now we've got the British announcing, what was it, I think 10 days ago, that they've now identified a gene that's common to criminals.
Yes.
It's kind of like the movie with Tom Cruise, where now they're going to have a committee for pre-crime. And so what's interesting about this is that a lot of people used to snicker at the longevity recorded in the Bible. Methuselah, 969 years old. Enoch, 365 years. So when you start to understand that the genetic altering, and one of the things I get asked all the time, and this is a great question, I think it's a fabulous question, did the ancient Egyptians have reason to believe that there would come a time when they could be reconstituted? May I read you the interesting thing from the British Museum?
Yes, you may.
Because this blew my mind, okay? And it's interesting because, again, we're talking about Ramesses was the second, one of the most famous pharaohs of Egypt, and it's fascinating that when we talk about this stuff, people say, well, they can't be doing that. Listen to this. This is from CNN Egypt. For decades, the mummified remains of Ramesses II have rested in the Cairo Museum and hauled out occasionally for the viewing pleasure of visiting dignitaries. Like his fellow pharaohs, Ramesses wanted nothing more than live for eternity. Now, some 3,000 years later, some observers speculate that maybe the ancient Egyptians, with their determination to preserve their bodies, were not so much prone to wishful thinking as they were thinking ahead. Reports that Scottish scientists have cloned an adult sheep named Dolly. Goes on to say, the question is whether such DNA could be cloned so the great Ramesses or perhaps Seti I or even King Tutankhamun rise again and have life after death they so desperately craved. And it goes on to basically say that, this is already being considered,
Well, Stephen, you seem to imply, and let me tell you, when I first interviewed you many months ago on terrorism, you scared the heck out of me, and the problem is I think you were right. You seem to imply that there's something going on here with DNA and giants. Who's doing this?
Well, obviously, and I believe that there is a group in the background, call them what you will, but there is a group in the background that's similar to the Third Reich that wanted to produce a Superman, or the Aryans, okay? And interestingly enough, that given the, how would I say this, and again, obviously we're dealing in a world with that's not just carnal, if you will, or physical, but that has a spiritual element in it. We're dealing with now, if you will, looking at every single headline in the paper. It's like the four horsemen of the apocalypse are on a full gallop. I believe that what we're going to see is basically just as in the days of Noah. And what people don't understand is in the days of Noah, all this really wicked and strange stuff was going on. I think we're getting ready to see it again in an unfathomable application to contemporary events.
Do you believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that giants were the offspring of extraterrestrials who came to this planet?
If you mean by extraterrestrials, I believe that angels were, and I believe in literal biblical angels, that basically had their own realm of being. In Greek, there's a word called oikaterion, which means, in essence, their place, their dwelling place, or their, if you will, boundaries. I believe they left the boundaries that God had given to them, and that they basically mixed with the seed of women, producing this offspring. And I think that it's going to happen again, because what's happening is in Noah's day, the whole earth was filled with violence. And let's face it, this isn't a land of peace and love. I'm not only saying this land, but things are not getting, in my opinion, more sedate or more mellow. They're building towards a climax. So to answer your question, I believe that what is commonly called the aliens, or as Zechariah Sitchin writes about the Anunnaki, are definitely fallen angels. So they would be extraterrestrials, but they would almost be extra-dimensionals.
Aren't fallen angels, Stephen, like the devil?
Well, the devil was actually a cherub, and there are different groups of heavenly beings. Let me give you a good example. One of the most interesting, if you will, windows into the past is the book of Enoch. Enoch was a guy that, in Genesis, very little is said about him, that he walked with God and was not, for God took him. Two guys that didn't die were Elijah and Enoch. The point being, as Enoch wrote or is attributed to writing the Book of Enoch, but there were also other volumes that have disappeared. There are people like myself that believe the Vatican has them and won't release them, okay? And it's interesting that you have in the Book of Enoch a whole a panorama of not only the past but also the future. And the future in the Book of Enoch is one that's pretty gruesome until God ultimately puts down evil. So I believe there is a battle between good and evil, and I believe that people should realize that if I want to keep you in the matrix, I'm going to provide you all the data and all the imagery that will support the matrix. Once you get outside of the data and imagery beyond the matrix, you find out, hey, somebody's been lying to me. And that's why I wrote this book. And again, it's 480 pages, George, 30 years of stuff. And people may not accept everything, but if they want to be blown away by what really went on in history, I would encourage them to do that. And by the way, on my website, there's a chart. I don't know if you've gone to it, but go to my website, stevequayle.com, and then look on the chart, and you'll see how tall 36-foot guys are in proportion to 6-foot guys.
Yeah, I saw that.
Well, and what's interesting, now obviously their arms would be bigger, their heads would be bigger and anything. That's just for relative size. And if you think about it again, you've got guys who are writing, from the Middle East. And have you noticed this week, too, that it seems like, well, actually in the last couple weeks, more flying saucers, more...
Oh, it's huge. They're all over the place for some reason.
They're all over the place. And so I maintain that obviously there's going to be, if you will, a dialectic setup where, the, quote, space brethren are here to save us from ourselves, kind of like the day the Earth stood still.
Yes.
And the point being is that there's a very sinister side to this. And the very sinister side to this is the fact that humanity is expendable, and it's kind of like, do you remember seeing an old Twilight Zone where an alien comes with supposedly the book to save everybody?
It's called To Serve Man. That's the name of the Twilight Zone.
Being lunch.
My very favorite Twilight Zone episode. You brought it up.
And basically, what I'm saying is that we're seeing the same thing being enforced. By the way, again, it seems like, unfortunately, this is something that's coming back on the scene. And let me make a distinction, because I think this is important, and maybe we have to get to it in the second half of the show, but there is a distinction between a demon and a fallen angel, okay? A demon is a disembodied spirit. The giants, when they died, that which was born of heaven and earth, those spirits were what became the demons. They have appetites, and they all have one thing in common. You know what it is? They hate mankind.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, this is fascinating stuff. And someone says, well, how does this fit into 20th century technology? The technology of the ancients so surpasses what we have now. The point is that we're all technologically egotistical and think, oh, boy, we got this, we got that. We don't even hold a candle to some of the things that have gone before us, because in the Book of Enoch, it talks about the supernatural intelligence of the fallen angels being given over to mankind to basically, enable us to kill all ourselves off.
More on Giants. I'm George Norrie. Back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. Stephen, if there happened to be a battle between the Giants and those of us who are of regular size, would the Giants wipe us out?
No, I don't think so. And I think that day is coming, because when you look at just a lot of the situation that we hear references to with the, if you will, the abductions with aliens, and we know that some of their ships go down, and interestingly enough, George, we would win, but we will pay a price for that. And I kind of am fascinated by the, if you will, the attack in Kathmandu, where people are actually being zapped by whatever flying, vehicle is getting them. You're probably aware of that, but 3 people have been basically, killed, murdered, zapped, and that's the first time I've actually heard. Maybe you have heard differently, but that's the first time I've heard of a ship actually opening up and firing on people.
Well, I haven't heard about it. You're right. Now, on the cover of your book, Genesis 6, the 2 giants seem to be pretty friendly.
Well, these guys are Kashmiri giants, and this was taken in the late 1800s, 1895, I believe. And it's kind of fascinating because when you're dealing with the whole area around the Himalayas, obviously Kashmir is in the vicinity. The very word Nepal, it comes from to fall. The locals call the Himalayas, or Himalayas, some people pronounce it, the mountain of the gods. That's where Hitler sent specific, I guess you'd say, cadres of the SS looking for some of the giant tombs. Some of the Buddhist monasteries supposedly had some golden sarcophaguses with guys that were somewhere around 18 feet tall. You know, you see that again in Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know, when Steven Spielberg made that movie, he did do his homework and look into that. So it was interesting because most people don't understand this, that because of Hitler's occult involvement, the SS, which was, a secret organization with a lot of mystical dabblings. They went all over the world. They were looking for the Grail. They were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. They were looking for the Spear of Longinus, the spear that pierced Jesus' side on the cross. So fascinating stuff that they were looking for. Then if you understand the history of UFOs, when they really came to the forefront was right after World War II, or during World War II, the closing years of World War II. Then one of the most fascinating things was Admiral Byrd and Antarctica. All of the German U-boats had disappeared. We actually had a war in Antarctica. Most people didn't even know it existed. It was called Operation High Jump. You familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, fascinating. Listen, George, there is so much incredible stuff out there.
What happened there?
Well, during World War II, at the close of the war, when obviously to a lot of the Nazi high command, they saw that they were going to lose the war, they headed down. Headed down. They actually took many of their U-boats down to Argentina, and then they went to Tierra del Fuego, which is on the coast of South America, and then they went into Antarctica. Supposedly, Antarctica was called, by the way, New Schwabenland, and because of the volcanic activity, there were actual, if you will, almost, and this is something that is fascinating beyond belief, but the bottom line is there were so many U-boats that disappeared that they were actually setting up, if you will, an under-ice city, if you will, last-ditch place that was so temperate that the reports that got back to the South Americans and got all over the world were that basically the Nazis had set up a base in Antarctica that was temperate. In other words, even in some areas it was tropical.
Underwater? Underwater?
Pardon?
This was underwater?
This was under the ice. Under the ice. And this, if someone wants to go on the internet and look this up, it's Operation High Jump, or you can go to Cyberspace Orbit and type it into their search engine. It's one of the most fascinating, overlooked stories of World War II. Interestingly enough, too, Byrd talked about encountering flying saucers, etc.
Well, there's no doubt about that, and I've seen accounts on that.
Right. So what I'm saying is you're asking me a question. I believe we're coming to that time where there will be another battle. Let me give you a good example, okay, how the ancient will reflect the future. In the ancient Greek mythology, there was the offspring of the chimera were the harpies. You've probably seen some of the Hollywood movies where they have these like huge creatures with bird-like bodies and the heads of women. The Norse legend, the equivalent were the Valkyries, okay? Obviously, Wagner's Charge of the Valkyries, very famous piece of music. But in Revelation 9, 8, and 9, it says the Great Tribulation period, and it is talking about this, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And this is talking about the battle that's yet in the future. So it's fascinating, isn't it? We look back to ancient history to look forward to the coming period of Great Tribulation. And I think Malachi Martin, and I want to bring him up again because that made such an impression on my life listening to him, putting two and two together. I think that he had access to so much stuff that everyone else is denied, okay? And given the access to what most people can only get snippets of or little pieces of, I think it absolutely took his breath away, and I think there's no way to describe it in human terms. And see, a lot of people get freaked out, and, I'm sorry for that, but there is an aspect of history that's very non-chemically deterministic, that's very, very much going to change the way the world sees itself. Let's take, for instance, crop circles, okay? Have you ever
I wonder what happened to all of Malachi Martin's files and things like that.
Well, I got news for you. I believe that he was wasted, and whoever wasted him took him. And when I say wasted, I don't believe that he just died a natural death.
No.
And again, I guess, whether people want to believe that or not, I could say this, there were points in Art's interview with him where he was very scared.
Yeah, I heard some of that in his voice.
Yeah, and I'm not making it up, am I? You heard it too.
I heard it in his voice. You could hear things like that. A concern. Maybe not just scared, but a concern.
Right. Kind of like a desire, George, to really tell what he knew, but he knew he couldn't. And, you know, it's interesting because if people have a hard time just grasping what I would call in-your-face history, how can they grasp stuff that's beyond their ability to even bring it into the containment of their brain?
All right, now what were you saying, though, about crop circles and giants?
Well, yeah, now we get into some interesting stuff because, again, when you're dealing with crop circles, and I think, you know, Colin says that there's probably about, he figures 25 to 30% are real, and then there's a whole bunch of people out there trying to fake. What's interesting about the crop circles, and I'll tell you a fascinating story, the crop circles are a language unto themselves, and they're a basic, some of them are spatial references to different coordinates in the universe, okay? Now, in the Bible, the word stars can be substituted for angels, okay, 7 stars, which are the 7 angels.
All right.
And it's fascinating that the crop circles, what I began to do a couple years ago is to match up, in a lot of the ancient writings, the angels have, you know, like your signature and my signature, they have more like symbols. They're not hieroglyphics, but it's fascinating that there's basically a vocabulary, and there's a whole story that's being told. Let's say, for instance, you're in, you're in Paris, and you wouldn't do this, but you write your name on a place, okay? And you said, this is George Norrie from Kansas City, Kansas, okay?
Me doing graffiti?
It's not only graffiti, but it's a time-sensitive graffiti. When I say that, it's almost like, have you noticed that the circles now are appearing in British Columbia and different parts of the world?
Oh, they're almost in every country on this planet except for one or two.
But have you noticed that they're coming out in the open or manifesting themselves almost in direct relationship to the increase in saucer activity?
True.
Well, what I'm trying to tell you is, and I got to tell you that this stuff gets into really heavy beyond what most people can grasp. The National Security Agency has a prime directive. That prime directive is simply anything that will upset the status quo is automatically classified, top secret, above top secret, and then in the compartmentalization of it. We've seen it recently in the announcement that if they do find a near-Earth orbiting object, the astronomers have to give so much notice, and they're not going to be able to tell the people for so many days. You remember that?
Yes.
Well, the National Security Agency basically has a prime directive, and anything that would disturb the status quo, or, how should I say this, upset the apple cart, and my definition of upsetting the apple cart is anything they don't want us to know, is automatically classified and automatically compartmentalized. This crop circle phenomenon is like, if you will, a timed sequence of messages, and believe me, I'm not talking about I'm not even dealing with the fake ones, okay? But I'm talking about that if you were to project back like with a computer and you take the star positions of about 12,500 years ago and you superimpose them on some of the on the crop circles, you get star maps. And it's kind of like a definition. I believe that each one of those real crop circles is if you will, a specific location for a specific fallen angel, and I believe there's actually a language to it, and I know the Russians have, if you will, their dictionary, and it's kind of fascinating because the Russians started preparing their crop circle dictionary back when a lot of their cosmonauts were encountering unusual beings in space, and you can go see that, on cyberspace.orbit's website.
Well, if the 20% that Colin Andrews says is definitely not man-made,
right.
And he believes that they may have been made through some kind of mass human consciousness or something, but then definitely not man-made. There's got to be a message behind the symbols. There is a message behind the symbol, and the deal is that this is most people, and please again understand that when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, this is beyond ATS. Okay. Well, how do you tie that into giants?
Well, for instance, if you look at the giant chalk figures that are in the plains of England, like the Salisbury Plain, or if you look at the Nazca lines, which are in Peru and stuff, the bottom line is you see imagery and you see giants that basically tie in with celestial coordinates. And this is something that, again, Graham Hancock, especially on the pyramids and some of the temples around the world, has done a magnificent job on. What it is, it's basically telling where this stuff is going to come from, and when I say this stuff, the entities that are going to return to Earth, and in getting into the, how should I say this, the guts of the crop circles, is the language would be space glyphs, okay? Not hieroglyphs, but space glyphs.
Maps?
Maps, star charts, positions, and names. And I think they're timed, and I don't know how they, and please, there's so much I don't know, but what I'm saying is it's fascinating that you cannot get away from the supernatural intelligence of these guys. Again, when you're dealing with the epic, the Indian Vedas and the epics and the different stories, you're talking about things that are absolutely beyond fathoming, yet this thing was recorded, thousands of years ago in such detail. It's basically, I think, kind of like, if you will, a time capsule.
Well, let me ask you this, though, Stephen. The dinosaurs were huge.
Right.
The animals now are not.
Right.
It's entirely possible that through genetics, the giants were huge. Earthlings now are not, obviously. What happened in between? I mean, did they leave? Did they die off? I mean, what happened to them?
Well, first of all, obviously the mass extinction, the ancients were very concerned about the cosmic catastrophes that had taken place. Everybody that recorded them, that's why they were so fascinated with the stars. They were worried about, this is my terminology, they were worried about covering their butt because they had experienced and had written down for them so many of what would call extinction-level events or mass extinctions. And, when you get into the Mayan calendar, what are they saying now? It used to be 2012, and I think it's moved up to 2029. But the point being...
No, I don't know about that. I thought it was still 2012.
No, I think there are some people now that have just come up with a new date. But let's say 2012, 2029. Have you noticed, too, that 1 minute the United States is stating that, gee, we're not worried about asteroids and stuff, and the next minute the British are making public statements in the European Union that they're going to get their plan to knock it out of orbit using nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
What there is there's doublespeak. Again, in the United States, we live in a matrix, okay? Almost all the information, all the imagery, all the sounds, everything we get are sound bites. But the point is, the rest of the world is amazed that the Americans can be so, and I interview different, when I say talk to them, obviously on email, I get hundreds of emails a day, and people are saying, do you see what's going on? And if you see how people outside the country view us, it makes those of us who are inside screaming at the top of the lungs, wait, there's a whole different world out there than is being portrayed on, the network news. And not to pick on them, but it's the same thing with history. Getting back to your original question, and I haven't forgotten about war, I believe that we're going to see the genetic altering of human DNA mixed with animal DNA to produce the very giants and monsters. And please, there are already patents like that. Are you aware of that?
War machines you're talking about, life forms that fight. You
got it. And it's fascinating because Bill Joy, one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, although, he wrote a fabulous essay, which is considered one of the best essays of all time, called Why the Future Doesn't Need Us Anymore. And he said with genetic engineering, cloning, and nanotechnology, we're basically facing extinction. That was the bottom line, and I would encourage everyone to read that. They can get it on the search engine, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us Anymore. I think they can get it on my website, too, www.stevequayle.com.
If you were able to get some of the bone marrow out of a giant's bone from the antiquity days, would you see a different genetic makeup as you would see from humans of today?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can tell you this, there are people that go around and get it. Some people that knew I was writing this book got a hold of me from Ohio, and this will blow your mind. They found, I think they were 9.5-foot giants in some of the burial mounds, The minute they let it be known, guess what? Certain members from the federal government showed up and took the bones. This is what somebody always asks me, where are all the bones? And the point being is that it seems like every time there's a major find like this, somebody comes and grabs them up. I believe the Human Genome Project on the surface has the stated meaning. I believe beyond that, there's a group that's definitely looking, you could call it, for the giant gene. You know, there's human growth factor H, HGF8, that they can introduce into mice and will literally cause the mice to grow to tremendous proportions, makes them stronger, etc. You've got the scientists now telling, basically, you're not going to die, George, because they can clone you a new body. They can download your entire memories, your entire sensory input, you know, and load it into a new body. And if you want, by getting connected to the right people, you can, you know, share their thoughts. In essence, you can have a thought sharing every single experience, whether it's love, hate, anger, orgasm, whatever. And there's actually a British couple that's doing that right now under a British Telecom grant.
I've always thought that that's exactly what they would do with people in mankind. You'd clone them, take their memories right off a chip, download it, and plug it right back in. And whenever the body's ready to age, you'd do it all over again. All over again. Stay with us. Stephen QUayle is my guest. His book, Genesis Giants, Master Builders of Prehistoric and Ancient Civilizations. I wonder if they helped build the pyramids. Let's find that out in a moment on Coast to Coast. Welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie with guest Stephen QUayle. Stephen, I want to relay a few fast blast questions to you. One very interesting from Wayne in Brook Park, Ohio. Wants to know if the Vatican, with all its history, has any data of this nature, what you were talking about, that they might be hiding. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with such specifics that, you know, it is absolutely astonishing to me that the amount of information that they have on this. They are also supposedly the group behind going out when any of the real artifacts of extreme importance, like giant skeletons and all this stuff, they're the ones that send out their, I guess you'd say, the equivalent of their cleaners, and they go out and get this stuff, and if they can't get it, they've got an agreement with certain, if you will, government agencies with us that go out and do it for them, too. So there's a real desire to suppress it.